Don't forget, ko-fi.com/stopwritingalone is a real simple way to show your support for what's going on here week after week. Hi everyone, this is Nicole Rivera and you're listening to the Stop Writing Alone podcast for writers who are looking for their writing community. I know you want to find readers for your work, but I think your first step is to connect with other writers. That's what we're going to do here in the Stop Writing Alone podcast. We'll do writing prompts and other writing group activities, discover online writing communities, learn how to find local writing groups, or how to make your own. Join us as we explore, learn, and write. This week's episode is sponsored by this podcast and all things Stop Writing Alone. If you want to support Stop Writing Alone in a real simple way, head on over to ko-fi.com/stopwritingalone. And that's spelled ko-fi.com/stopwritingalone. But ko-fi.com is a great space to support all creatives. So go check it out and see who else that you love is over there and looking for a little pick-me-up. That's ko-fi.com/stopwritingalone to support this podcast. And I thank you to all my supporters. Now on to this week's episode. Hi, this is Nicole Rivera, and you're listening to the Stop Writing Alone podcast. A couple of weeks ago, I did an entire episode on writing resolutions and how I go about creating my resolutions and the process that I follow to sort of keep myself accountable. And I think I mentioned what my goal is for 2021, but I wanted to go a little bit more in depth in the conversation about it. So last year, it's pretty well known at this point that I committed to writing 52 short stories in 52 weeks, and that's kind of what inspired me to head on over to YouTube and start sharing weekly writing prompts just to make sure I had some inspiration throughout the year. Even if I was running dry on ideas. And to be perfectly honest with you, and I think I probably mentioned this on the podcast back then, I really thought when I took on that challenge that I would also be submitting my work throughout the year. Obviously not in the beginning. I didn't think that I'd, write a story in January and submit it to some magazine or something, by the end of the month. But I foresaw that 6 months in I would probably get into a rhythm and groove of writing that I could then add on the other skill of submitting those works. I might after 6 months hopefully have one or two stories that I thought deserved publication and could qualify based on someone else's criteria. However, we all know 2020 was a weird year on the one hand, and then on the other hand, I also launched the Happy Campers Club and was doing a lot of stuff with the community, so that showing up for myself really was doing my 52 short stories was like the max of my limit, and then showing up for NaNoWriMo. And I became okay with that. Somewhere in the summer, I just said, release the idea that you're going to be submitting, Nicole, because, that's a whole nother skill set, a whole nother thing to think about, and just focus on showing up for your stories. And it was around that time that I realized that would be my one step forward for the new year. If you recall, and if you don't, I'll put the link in the show notes for how I do writing resolutions. But I always look at where I'm at, and then I ask myself, what's the next step from that point? And how is that going to move me forward? And so here I am with well over 52 short stories written, or I should say 52 short story drafts of different lengths written all over the place. What's the next step? I mean, the tiniest, itty-bittiest next step would be if I said to revise all 52 stories and just work my butt off on just that. But one of the things that I'm always looking at when I'm asking myself, what is the next step? It is, what is the next step that's going to help me grow in some way? And the thing about last year's challenge, about the 52 short stories, was that the thing that I felt like I was struggling a lot with was finishing. Because when you write long fiction, you get a lot of practice in starting stuff, but you don't necessarily get as much practice getting to the end of stories if you waffle in between and you start, following the new shiny idea, or even if you complete them. I mean, I've completed 3 full-length novels now, drafts, I should say. I got to the finish of 3, but that's over like years. And so I said, I want to get more practice at finishing things. So 52 short stories, so I'll have 52 finishes, right? So, and again, I've had practice with revision. I've revised short stories. I've revised longer works. So that itty bitty step of revising 52 short stories doesn't really push me forward in a broader sense. Yes, I'd have 52 short stories at the end of the year, but where am I as a writer in terms of growth? However, the thing that I have had resistance against is getting my work out there in a formalized manner. I have these 2 different ways that I look at my work. And one is like, I want it out there. And when I had a personal blog, I had this really bad habit of typing, and the shiny publish button was right there, and boom, I would publish immediately. And that was one of the dangers of me engaging with the platform Medium. The great thing about Medium is that it was, it was a possible avenue to payment for my writing. But the bad thing about it was that I could publish everything immediately without thinking twice about, like, is this the best home for this piece of writing? And as writers, that's something that we do need to think about, because when you get into submissions, a lot of times they'll say it's got to be, previously unpublished. And you might have published a story or a poem or some piece of writing that was really wonderful and, fits perfectly for a particular publication, but now is out of the running because you pressed publish on Medium or your blog or anywhere else, right? So while I have done the querying of my novel, I've done it in such a slow motion, scaredy cat way that I knew I needed to push the bar a bit on this. So what's my scaredy cat way? It's so ridiculous, guys. So I've queried my novel. I don't even have a count of how many different agents I've sent it to or places that I've submitted it. I'm going to say it's 5 or less, though. Yeah, it's like probably 3 or 4, actually, that I think about it. But here's how I do it. I have my query letter, which I went through, at length on a previous episode. I have my completed manuscript. I've had, and I've gone through and I've found a person that I'm like, this is where I want to send it. And I send it, following the criteria of what they ask for. Is it the first 5 pages, or is it just the query? Is it, I think those were the 2 standards that I really had for the first run of things. And then did nothing. And then just waited on the answer of that singular person. Yeah, I did my own writing and I started other projects, but in terms of submitting, I did nothing else. I felt like I think what I was thinking is that, like, I'm not giving that person a chance if I'm just jumping out and sending it to someone else. So, and then I had the first 5 and then requests for the first 50 pages. And so I just went through this extended process. I mean, anyone that's done this, that takes a really long time to get from one step to the next step, and then nothing else is happening with that novel. And so by the end of this year, I was like, okay, the new thing that I need practice in is repeated submission, like getting out there in a more voluminous way. And I love the idea. If you remember when I interviewed Tammy Brightweiser, she had her 100 rejections project where she was just going to keep submitting until she hit 100 rejections. And Tammy loves like 100 challenges. And you can listen to Tammy. She has her own podcast, The Accidental Inspirationalist. And she is actually running her own submission challenge. So check her out on her podcast, but also on Instagram. She's Inspire Tammy B, and you can find information about what she's doing with submissions. And she has these push groups that are great for support and accountability. But when she did the 100 rejections project, that kind of like lit a little lantern in my head. And that was when I was, getting ready with my 52 stories. And I was like, yeah, that's great. I will start submitting and I'll get myself to multiple rejections. But like I said, the submissions never happened. And as I came upon this year, I said, okay, I'm going to be realistic with myself. That number is probably too big for me, just knowing where I'm at. And I loved the rhythm of last year's 52 stories in 52 weeks because it wasn't too overwhelming, but it definitely pushed me that I had to show up for myself and my writing once a week in some real way. I couldn't really let it linger too long. So I'm doing 52 submissions in 52 weeks now. And I really did it just because I like the idea of not letting things linger too long. But I am now in week 3, and I want to tell you how already it has changed me as a writer as soon as I did my first submission. So on my first submission, which is a hilarious debacle of Nicole doing things messy, as usual. But when I finally got my first submission done, figured out what publication I wanted to send it into, looked at all of their requirements, got the payment, figured out their submission page, got the formatting right on my doc, and I sent it all in. And I wrote it down in my planner where I'm sort of taking notes of everything, and I used my little Trello board. I have a really cool Trello board for my whole submission process. So I slid over the story to the column that said it's on submission. And typically my scent at that point is to sit and wait. Okay, I did. I'm so proud of myself. My story is going out there. I can't wait to hear what the results are. And I will just wait for those. I've done my deed. I've submitted work. I'm a real writer. And let it lie. But because I set myself this imaginary challenge, like nobody's holding me accountable to this, but because I've like said it out loud enough times, I know that I have to do 52 submissions in 52 weeks. I was not allowed to sit in that space. The first thing I thought of as soon as I finished submitting was, oh, okay, so like what am I going to look at for next week? Who should I submit to next? Which story do I have to fit this, I'm going to look for a theme that matches one of my stories, or should I look at my stories. I was just like all in go mode. I was immediately thinking about what to do next for my next submission. And that was so incredibly different than typical me. So this is why I like these personal challenges and these little like writer resolutions or yearly goals. And I'm really loving the rhythm of doing something weekly, because you don't have a lot of time to fool around if you've got yourself a weekly challenge. So all of that is to say why I feel like this is a great challenge for me. But I did want to bring the conversation of submitting your work to the podcast this week, because there's a lot of little things that go into submitting. You know, are you ready? When you are ready, what do you do? What are you going to look at? Where do you even find places to submit? So the number one thing that I want to say is I think it's a really great idea to make some sort of commitment to yourself of how many things you want to submit either in the next month, in the next year. You know, what is your one step forward for this year? Are you brand new at this and you haven't submitted anything and you just want to do maybe, you know, 1 or 2 submissions this year because you know that you're going to be working really hard on creating the story and editing the story and doing revisions, and getting to that point of submitting is pretty far down the road that you don't want to like overwhelm yourself with something weekly. Don't forget, when how am I doing weekly submissions? Well, I have a backload of how many stories already written, and I'm still writing every week anyway. You know, this is just like a new thing woven into my schedule. If you're not there and you don't have all of that ready to go, you probably have to do this on a little bit slower schedule. A couple people I spoke to said, I love the idea of looking at the year, but maybe I want to do like 12 submissions in a year, 1 per month. That's also fantastic. But I think there's something really powerful in picking some number to shoot for and having a general idea in your mind of what the time frame for that is. So like when Tammy did her 100 rejections, she knew that was going to require more than 100 submissions. And she knew she had to, she had her own schedule going. I've got 52 submissions going on. So that's 1 per week for me. If you want to do the 12 in a year, that's 1 per month. But the idea of having this number, I think, really keeps the cogs moving in the way that I saw just in week 1. I mean, I cannot tell you how silly and stupid. I don't like saying the word stupid, but it's like sometimes it applies. Like that was really like a dumb little thing that I did that is the fix that I have needed for years. For years, I've been unable to submit something and then turn around and ask, okay, what am I submitting next? Why did this work? I don't know. Sometimes the silliest things are, that trick. You trick yourself into these things. So where am I getting all of the places that I am looking at to submit? First of all, I've talked about this on Instagram. I shared it in an email this past week, a pretty intense email that had like a lot of stuff in it. So I apologize for that. And what I've been doing on Sundays on Instagram, and I think I discussed this last week's episode also, is that when I'm stumbling upon submission calls, I'm sharing them in the Stop Writing Alone Instagram stories, because I can't even look at all these things. There's so many submission calls out there, but I want to make them available in case anything triggers for somebody else. You might see historical fiction, could you do flash fiction and historical fiction? Oh, yes, you can. Jackie Dana just wrote a 250-word historical fiction story that was So good. So it can happen. You may see a call for that and you say, oh, that's my favorite. And I'm going to be like, no, I cannot do the historical fiction. I won't say I cannot do. I just have not done. And I definitely don't have anything waiting in the wings for that. But I still want to share it so that the community sees it in case it's something for you. So that's what's happening over on Instagram. I'm sharing submission calls that I'm finding as I'm looking on social media. I'm seeing various, I follow a bunch of literary magazines, journals, some online places that are sharing, that are publishing. There's contests out there. But then there's also these curation centers that all they do is list all of the different places that you can submit your work. And if you're ready to submit, you need to be on Submittable. So that's submit, I'm going to spell now and I feel like I'm going to mess it up. SUBMIT. I think it's two T's, and then TABLE. Submittable.com. If you've submitted any work, chances are you already have a Submittable account because so many of these magazines use Submittable as their entryway into submitting work. However, if you haven't started yet, that's a great place to go. You go over to submittable.com and they have a discovery page. On their discovery page, they just list all of the different submission calls that are current on their page. Some of them will apply to you, some of them won't, but they will list them by date. I mean, you will see something that is like due today in 2 hours. It's like, okay, not ready for that one. But you can scroll down and look ahead and think about your schedule of when you want to submit something. If you want to do something every single month, you can look for something at the end of January and see, do I have a story that would fit a contest or a submission call for something at the end of January or the beginning of February, and just use that as your goal. You want to submit to this place. Another place that does curation like this is New Pages. So New Pages has just an extensive list of all different publications. And when I say extensive, guys, I'm talking about like not just general literary magazines. You're going to find very niche markets. You're going to find something. I found something that was like, because I'm literally just going through the list of names and clicking on them and seeing what do they want? What do they want? And I found something that was just for writers in North Dakota. And I was like, okay, that's not for me. Let me move on. And then you'll find like this literary magazine is looking for great stories about birding. And it's like, okay, I don't have something on that, but maybe you do, right? So New Pages and Submittable are the two places that I go to. I just kind of have their collections saved, and that's what I'm using my week by week when I say like, oh, what will I do next? Let me scroll through, see what's here. And then I've spoken about her before, but C. Hope Clark runs a newsletter called Funds for Writers. And I'm guessing it's weekly. I'm not entirely sure. I just know it pops up in my inbox. And that is another person that curates contests and grants and submission calls. And those are all great spots to look at for submitting your work. And I've said this in the past, but sometimes I'll even use a submission call as a writing prompt. You want a short story, no longer than 2,000 words, and the theme of this issue is ghosts. Let me sit down and think about writing a ghost story that's no longer than 2,000 words, and sit down, go to it, and try to actually work to create the thing that fits what they're asking for, rather than trying to, make something that I have fit into their mold. And you'll find, things that are specific and thematic, but you'll also find open submission calls where it's just, make sure your word count's right and you're golden. However, what I want to say is that when you go out into the submission world and you are looking for a place for your writing to go, one of the things that holds back so many new writers is the fact of the matter that there are loads of scams out there. So things you have to think about when you're looking at a submission call. And I made this note about my Submit Sunday stuff. When I'm sharing stuff, I'm doing a very cursory overview of what's there. But before you submit anywhere, you read the guidelines, you read the permissions, who's going to have the rights to this writing after it's done? What is actually going to happen to the writing if you accept it? Is this for an online publication? Is this for a print publication? Is it for both? Can I submit to more than one place? Do you want a work that may have been published somewhere else? And I think you have to be like extra hyper about this when somebody's asking for money. When they ask for a submission fee, which is fairly common. So I don't want you to think like, oh, they're asking for money. What am I, they're shady? Absolutely not. I mean, chances are, like, a lot of times I don't even want to make any generalized comments, but basically make sure that there's some balance here. If you're paying to submit, there should be, I would think, a payment for publication. Are you getting some of that money in return? This goes for contests. This goes for, publication. I like to think about it as value, right? So, for instance, the NYC Midnight Contest that I love to participate in. They have like lots of different contests. I just finished round 1 of the shorts, the microfiction. I didn't make it to round 2 in that one. So that contest is around like $50, depending on the length of the story that you write. Some of their contests are like $20, $30. Some of them go up to like $50, $60. And so it's like, whoa, that's getting up there. What's the value that I'm getting for a contest that's $50 or $60? So just as a quick example, their short story contest is starting this Friday, and a regular rate entry fee is $58. Now, you could have gotten an early bird, and I did get early bird and some extra discount. Okay, great. But $58, what are you getting for it? Well, if you win, there are prizes that are, upwards of $1,000 because it's like multiple first, second, and third, I think they have. They might have a fourth. I'm not sure. But what are the chances that I'm going to go 4 or 5 rounds to that end at this point? I don't know. So far, the furthest I've gotten in NYC Midnight is 2 rounds. So I've gotten nowhere near that prize money. Why do I keep entering? I am still getting an extreme value, to my mind, from participating in these contests, because one thing that they do is that they give you feedback on your story, and it's feedback from multiple judges. So for me, that is a nice value balance. I like the feedback that they give. They're usually pretty spot on. Once I read their feedback and I've had the separation of myself and the story, however long it took them, I'm like, yeah, they got a good point there. That's great. And then that helps me craft that story on a revision much better. Now, if they were charging me $58 to enter, and I was so far off from getting anywhere near the prize money, and there were no feedback, there was no other value point except, good luck, Nicole. Maybe you'll get that, that big prize next time. That's not happening for me. That's too I'm literally not getting value unless I win, right? So know what your value points are. What are you looking for? Because value can be defined in lots of different ways. Obviously, the clearest point of value is money, right? So if I'm paying a $5 reading fee, but you'll pay me, $70 for publication, well, that's not bad, right? Oh, $5, I might get, $60 or 70 something dollars back. But if that same fee for publication, is $70 and you're asking me to pay you, nearly $30 to read, now I'm not sure this is worth it for me. So you have to use your own judgment on that, but don't forget about the other levels of value. There is, as in NYC Midnight, for me, the learning, the experience, the feedback, all of those things are valuable. So are you getting that from your experience of submitting work somewhere? And then the third thing, and this is the tricky one, the third value that I think sometimes people put too much value on is exposure, the byline. For years, I wrote for free for 2 different websites, and I was writing daily, showing up, writing multiple blog posts for people other than me, getting paid nothing. And I was really, really happy to be associated with each of the websites, that I was a staff writer on each of the websites, and that if you searched me, I'd be connected with these communities. But I definitely stayed and gave more than I got in the end. That's a great exposure. Once or twice, get your name on the website, get a good article that you wrote that goes, gets some good hits and maybe gets people driving back to your website. That's fantastic, but don't over give and overshare. Think about where you want to be, and and what you can get out of everything that you write and submit. And that was the question I had to ask myself about Medium, right? Was I getting the value? There's a byline there for sure. I can put my little links in there. People can come back to the podcast or my website or what have you. But was I getting into big enough publications to make it worth my while? And in turn, was the money value coming in? I definitely wasn't getting too much learning or feedback from there. Experience, it's kind of like writing for a blog. So I had that already. So yeah, that's really what I want you to think about. And I feel like if you can get a good handle on what your value points are, and you can judge a submission call based on that, you're going to be much more equipped to spot the scam. You're going to spot the thing that is not really helping you out. After that, once you've come to a point where you've found a legit place to submit, a place that you like, that fits your work, and you have something that you think is ready to go, what do you have to worry about? Usually there are, I would think, like 3 big things that almost everybody wants. Number 1, the first thing that you have to get real comfortable with is being a stickler for formatting. And that's not just like, I'm not just going to tell you like everything should be 12-point font and double space, because I'm not sure. You have got to get really comfortable with reading submission guidelines and using them like your Bible. So I used to tell my students this all the time when I was teaching seniors. I was like, I got to tell you guys the secret to getting like A's in college is please make sure you show up on the first day of class and get that syllabus and make that your Bible. The teachers, the professors literally tell you on day one every single thing that you need to do in order to pass. And you just have to like keep looking back and doing it. It was like a secret I figured out in my last year of college. I was like, oh, it's right here. That's like submission guidelines. Okay. So every single literary journal pretty much has under their little submit button on their website guidelines. And that's like the first thing I go to when I'm looking at a publication for myself, because they're going to tell you there what's the word count that they're interested in. They're going to tell you if they are thematic or if they're looking only for certain types of work. We are, only interested in poetry, or we're only interested in flash fiction. Don't send us romance. I mean, they are so explicit about what they want that you can just sit there and say, you are not for me while you're reading the guidelines. Or as you go through each little criteria, you start to think about that one story you have that is absolutely fitting perfectly. Say, I can submit here. This is great. In there, like I said, word count, themes, that type of stuff will be there, but also specific formatting. We want, some places just want a PDF. Some places want a doc or RTF file. Some people want 12-point font, but they don't care exactly what font. Some people are saying Times New Roman, 12 points, double spaced. Make sure your margins are 1 inch. And then this last publication, no, it was the first place that I submitted to in January. They not only wanted Times New Roman, they wanted 12-point font. It had to be a Word doc. And they wanted my full mailing address on the first page and all of the pages to be numbered. That one was new on me, to have both those things at once in one document. But, had I not read that, and had I not gone back into my doc and added that specifically, that's it. Like, they open the doc, they don't see the address, they're not even reading it. Okay, so that's number one. Formatting is a must. You have to look at submission guidelines, and that'll give you that information. And within the submission guidelines, they will talk about one or two of the following things, and that is the cover letter and the bio. Cover letter, it depends on who you're submitting to. Lots of times, if you're doing something through that service that I mentioned earlier, Submittable, there's no need for it because everything is filled out in the form there. But typically they do ask for a bio. I think they just even have the box right there for the bio. So what's in a cover letter? This isn't exactly like a query letter. And again, I'll have that query letter episode in the show notes for you. But it's there's some similarities to it. If you're talking short story, I should say, if you're talking for submitting to literary publications, they'll want your bio. They'll want a little bit about your story, and any of your writing experience, and if you don't have writing experience, that's fine. I don't see anything wrong with honesty, right? You could say, depending on where you're at. Let's say you're a student, right? And you're just coming out of college. You say, I've spent my last 4 years studying creative writing, and this is my first story that I'm, submitting to a publication. And you could put a little flattery in there about why you chose them, Or you could say, I've been busy raising my 3 kids, writing stories and imagining in between, changing diapers and getting them to school. And have you heard about remote learning? But I'm finally ready to start submitting. And here's my first story that I'm submitting to you, 2,000 words, yada, 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 and go on from there. I think that's fine. I've heard that's fine. And many of the publications that I'm seeing, they say we're looking for new writers. We want to help new writers. I mean, especially if that's the publication you're submitting to. Obviously, in your cover letter, you can be, brutally honest about, this is my first time submitting, that you are their people. If it is your first time submitting and the publication describes themselves as, sharing experienced writers or what have you, they're not the right fit for you, ... yet. Put them on, put a little tab. When you get your first couple of publications, you come on back to them. And then you have your cover letter that says, I've been published in this literary magazine and this literary magazine. Right now I'm submitting this to you. That's a cover letter. Just here's what I'm submitting. Here's where I've been published before, if I've been published before. And here's a little bit about me. And it's really just standard bio, like where do you live? If you've been writing, again, that's in there. Something quirky about you. But speaking of bios, there's also, some places ask specifically just for a bio, and they usually want you to be weird about it and write it in third person, like you're not writing about yourself. And so I'm going to read you my bio and then talk about it in a second. This is what I have for right now as I'm submitting, and it'll probably change, but whatever. This is what I submitted to my first 2 places this year. Third person, remember, here we go. Nicole Rivera is the creator of All Things Stop Writing Alone, which started as a podcast in 2019, grew into a YouTube channel, and an online writing community that was just about sanity saving through the solitude of life during the pandemic. In a previous lifetime, Nicole was a New York City public high school teacher and teacher coach for over 10 years. After spending 2020 writing 52 short stories in 52 weeks, Nicole is now turning her attention to revision, submission, and collecting her best works for an anthology while living the remote learning mom life in Staten Island, New York, with her 6-year-old son and English high school teacher husband. So I've got a lot now in my bio because of Stop Writing Alone. But before I had Stop Writing Alone, in the year previous, when I was writing my query letter, I would say, I'm working on creating a podcast called Stop Writing Alone. And before that, before Stop Writing Alone was a dream, the beginning of my bio said, I've been blogging at, and put my blogging spaces. And before that, because again, I have been querying and submitting for a long time, one thing at a time, I just put, I've been writing, and I talked about how I was a teacher. And that's it. And I wasn't even a teacher anymore. So you put what you got as far as I'm concerned, but you do have to write, if it's your bio separate from the cover letter, singular bio, then it's third person. Why is it third person? Because chances are they're going to like copy and paste it as your byline when they publish. They don't want to have to write your bio. So it's done for them. If you're writing it in the cover letter, you could just take that same paragraph and just change it to first person. I have a podcast name, Stop Writing Alone, and yada, yada, yada from there. So that's pretty much it for now for what's going on with submission and what are the things that you need to think about for submission. The last note that I would say is, once you do all that reformatting and you get the document exactly the way you want, not only double check, not only triple check, but please quadruple check everything that you're submitting. So for some reason this week, I had opened up the file of the document that I submitted in the first week of January. And this is the one that I told you I had to add my address in and I had to add the page numbers in. So I had it open, and I think I did it in my phone, which is, probably dumb. But I was just typing my address. So I was just typing. But anyway, when I opened it up this week, I looked at the first sentence. And I did tweak something in the first sentence, but it wasn't this word. I think autocorrect changed one of my words. What was the word? Oh, why would autocorrect do this? Okay. I had put the word draped, D-R-A-P-E-D. And when I opened the doc this week, it said Draper, which is the name of a street around here that maybe I've written in my phone, and my phone thought that's what I was trying to write. That's how it got submitted. So I'm pretty sure that'll be a rejection because it's a typo in the first sentence. So that's my lesson from week 1 to quadruple check, especially if you're tinkering with any of the formatting. Make sure that nothing funky happened. I didn't feel like I needed to reread the story after I just added my address and page numbers in because I had just reread the story before that. I don't know where the ER came from. But that is it. I'm curious how your submission journey is. Are you a person that has been submitting all along and you don't struggle with this? Or are you somebody that needs the push, needs a magic number to shoot for this year? And if so, let me know. What is your magic number? Would you like to jump on the 52 submissions in 52 weeks? Do you think, 12 submissions, 12 months is the way to go? Or are you just, looking to be like, this is the year I want to submit one thing? Whatever it is, come on over to the Stop Writing Alone Facebook group and let's start to chat about that. And also, don't forget, if you are on the submission journey, come on over to Instagram on Sundays, head into this stories bit, and I will be dropping in different things. I'm always looking for stuff that has like a deadline coming up. I've been sharing poetry submissions and flash fiction and fiction. So yeah, just 2 things that I'm trying to help you guys out with while I am doing this as well. That is all for this week. I will let you know that if you are interested in writing creative nonfiction at all, then I think you are going to be really interested in hopping over to the YouTube channel this Friday. This will be the 3rd Friday Night Writes. It is the first exercise specifically for creative nonfiction, but it is one of my favorite exercises to do just to get you in the mind space of writing from memory. And I think it's a really good way to start off this creative nonfiction journey this year. So that'll be this Friday over on YouTube, and the channel is N as in Nancy, V as in Victor, and then my last name, Rivera. But that's pretty much it. Have a wonderful week. Thank you, as always, for listening. If you haven't reviewed the podcast, it has been a while since anyone has dropped a review for Stop Writing Alone. So that would be awesome. But that's really it. Okay, I keep saying that's it. Have a great week. Thank you for listening. Talk to you next Thursday. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the Stop Writing Alone podcast wherever you're listening to this episode today. Then connect with us on Facebook at Stop Writing Alone Facebook page, or in the Stop Writing Alone with Nicole Rivera Facebook group. Check Instagram or Twitter, where I'm at NV_Rivera, to find links to our email newsletter. Recording, hosting, editing, producing. It's so much work. Disaster has struck. I finished my coffee. Tell me coffee is coming. ko-fi.com/stop writing alone.